Once we know what the name of a chord is, we know how that chord is constructed. Now we've looked at the diatonic, minor and major, and that's absolutely fine. But we can go on from that. We can add another note. In fact, we can add another 2 notes, 3 notes, 4 notes. I mentioned before that all music can carry on all the way across 2 octaves. So let's take another look at our C major scale and divide those up. Now, what happens if we start to add other notes? Well, the first thing that we would always do is look at adding one more note to our triad. And the one note we're going to add is the one that's the same distance between. So we've got this distance, which essentially is the 3rd and the 5th. And the next one, we would go to the 7th. And that gives us this lovely sounding chord. This is known as a major 7th. Now we can carry on the 7ths in exactly the same way on our scale that we did with our triads. This is 4 notes. This is now a 7th diatonic. And we can go up the diatonic in the same way. Bear in mind that we can only use this white note pattern when we're in the key of C major or its relative key of A minor. It would sound something like this. Now, in the same way that our chords had different names when we were looking at our normal diatonic, the same is true for our 7ths. We have a major 7th followed by a minor 7th. That's chord 2. Followed by a minor 7th, chord 3. Followed by a major 7th. So this would be C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7. This one here, this is called G7. I'll explain why in just a second. This next one is a minor 7. And then this one, the penultimate, or the 7th, the 7th 7, is known as a minor 7 flat 5. So, we've got a couple of things there that you may go, well, how come you have a chord that's known as a 7 and the others are major 7 or minor 7? We've even got a really strange one in there called minor 7 flat 5. This is all to do with the original point about intervals and how they belong to the key of the note that you are looking at. So let me have a look at the G within C to see if you guys can kind of make the connection. At the moment, I am using all the notes in the key of C major. If I play this chord, I'm in the key of C. So immediately I know that all of those intervals are 1, 3, 5 and 7. The 7 belongs to the major key. It is therefore known as the major 7. we have the third, which becomes the major 2. The fifth is the perfect fifth. Always remember that we call the fifth the perfect, and that's because a fifth doesn't have a major or a minor quality. It stacks up well. It's all to do with the harmonics. It sounds pretty cool, and it doesn't have the voicing of a minor or a major. On guitar, this is why we play power chords. A power chord is constructed from a 1 and a 5, and then we put the 1 back in again, so we have this sound. That's not major or minor. And it stacks up really well when you add distortion, because the harmonics within distortion make it sound the way they do. Now, if I was to look at 7 and say, well, how come C major 7 is different than G7, we have to look at the key of G and compare. So let's do that. The key of G, we remembered, had 1 sharp. Okay? 1 sharp. And if we count that sharp, whereabouts does it live within the scale? Let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Back to the octave. Now bear that in mind. Bear that note in mind. In the key of G major, F sharp is the 7th note. Okay? Let's go back to C now. And let's play our diatonic sevenths. Number 1, that's 2, that's D, E, F, G. Now, let's look at this chord. Let's look at this chord in relationship to the scale of G. What can you notice doesn't belong to the scale of G? Look, see where that finger is. In the scale of G, this note belongs, the F sharp. F does not belong to the scale of G major. But it belongs to the scale of C major. And we're constructing our chords from the scale of C major. That means that this chord must have a different name. And it does. If we flatten the 7th within our major scale, we have something known as the dominant 7th, or the 7th. So wherever you see the chord 7, it will be constructed from a major scale of the intervals 1, 3, 5, flatten, 7. Let's do the same thing then if we were to make a C7. How would we do that? Well, let's do this. 1, 3, 5. There's our 7th within the scale, but let's flatten it. Look, that's the same sounding chord. That chord is C7. It has that note in it. That note doesn't belong to the scale of C major. So it's not one of our diatonic chords within C. We might still want to use it though, but we would be jumping outside of that particular major scale. So we kind of now know that we can keep stacking them. And that if we're using diatonic sevenths, they will follow the pattern of chord 1 is a major 7, chord 2 is a minor 7, chord 3 is a minor 7, chord 4 is a major 7, chord 5 is a dominant 7, chord 6 is a minor 7, and chord 7 is a minor 7 flat 5. And that is only called a minor 7 flat 5 because if we compare those notes to the scale of B major, then the third note will be flattened to provide a minor, the fifth note will be flattened, which will give us the flattened fifth, and the seventh note will also be flattened to give us a 7, which is known as a dominant 7. And that's why. Now that's a little bit more complicated as a chord, and that chord becomes a mainstay in jazz because we use this chord a lot in harmonic minor and melodic minor too. But the reasoning for it is all to do with referencing against that major scale. Now here is the unfortunate reality of what you're going to have to do. You can look at a million tutorials on this, but you will not understand what is happening until you pick up an instrument and you can make that relationship between what that original major scale has in it and now what the notes have changed to when we are looking at the diatonic, i.e. the chords created in another major. And there is no quick solution for that. The only way you can do it is to sit down and work it out. I guarantee that you will get something from it. You will have a eureka moment. But here's the downside. That within that eureka moment, unfortunately, there are lots and lots of points that you will doubt yourself and that you will kind of feel that you're getting nowhere with it. Now, of course, exactly the same thing applies to sevenths as it does to the diatonic for the major and the minor. So we can play exactly the same chords starting on note 6 that will give us our minor diatonic chords based on the fact that this is now in the key of A minor. Chords remain exactly the same, but this time the order starts on a different point, the 6th point. And it will sound like this. It will start with an A minor 7. The second chord now will be our B minor 7 flat 5. Our third chord will be a C major 7. The next chord will be a D minor 7. The next will be an E minor 7. The next will be an F major 7. The penultimate will be the G7. And then we go back to our first chord again, which is our A minor 7. So this is very, very important because it's a palette. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's have a quick look at how I could relate these chords. Okay, chords noodling around in the key of A minor. Let's do the same thing, but pull them into C major. Any derivative of diatonic chords will give you an instant song. Okay, because the melody is pulling your ear in a certain way. Now, of course, we might want to go outside of that, but there's lots of ways that we can do this too. And all of them do relate to some kind of theoretical component. And that's the point really about becoming comfortable with some of these terms and terminology. Now obviously there's so much further that we can go with this, but I wanted to give you some fundamentals so that when we now look at our songwriting or composition starting point number 3, where we're chording our melody, that we at least know how we're approaching the chording aspect and how our first kind of ear will always pick up the diatonic. It's going to help you so much. So I thoroughly recommend you do invest the time. However much of a chore this might appear at first, it will take years and years of your learning and your ability to both play and understand. It is not a chore if you are playing your instrument and you're rocking out. So do that, I thoroughly recommend. Okay, so good luck.